All right.
All right. We are recording. People are already coming in.
Great.
Hi, Catherine. Hi, Elizabeth. We have Eric, Hannah. Hey, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. We're going to get started in just a couple of minutes here. So get settled in and get started in the chat. We would love to hear from you, just where you're from, what organization you're with. So we're going to get started in just a couple minutes today. So welcome to the Nonprofit Marketer's Guide to Reusing and Repurposing Content. I'm really excited to have Ariana Keil here from Canto to go into how we can make the most of the existing content we already have and really get our time back. So I know that time is a huge challenge for nonprofits, and I'm excited to have you here. So we'll let everyone get a little settled in and get started in just a moment. So
hi, everyone.
Ariana's here with us as well. Let's take a look at the chat. Got to open that up. So we have Eric, who's from the Aquarium of Niagara Falls. He's in Niagara Falls. We have Jillian here from Chelsea, Massachusetts. We have Leah here from...
I see someone from Orange County. That's my hood. Hi, everyone.
Yeah. So where exactly in Orange County are you? I'm just curious.
I'm out of Santa Ana.
Nice.
So right in the middle.
Beautiful area. I'm, as always, here from Brooklyn, New York. So it's very nice out these days. So I'm finally feeling like summer is here.
So I don't have to feel bad about, I always feel bad being from Southern California when I complain about weather. I have no right to.
It is super beautiful. Very jealous of my California friends. So Becky's here from Richmond, Virginia, Elizabeth from Seattle. So welcome everyone to today's webinar. I want to let everyone know that today's webinar is being recorded. You're going to get the recording in your inbox tomorrow. So don't worry about having to take too many notes, and you can always rewatch it later. Ariana, if you're also willing, we can share the slides in a PDF format with the audience.
That is totally fine. I'll make sure to send you the most updated version and we can get that over to them.
Perfect. So yeah, slides and recording in your inbox tomorrow. I'm going to be also taking some careful notes, so we'll send you resources and additional opportunities that are mentioned during this webinar in that follow-up email as well. We are going to be having a Q&A time. So I love that we're engaging in the chat. For questions that you want Ariana to answer, please go ahead and put those in the Q&A pane. So that'll be the easiest way for us to get to all of your questions. So welcome again, everyone who's just joining to the Nonprofit Marketer's Guide to Reusing and Repurposing Content. So we're getting started with our webinar today. I want to let everyone know that today's webinar is hosted by Community Boost and presented by Canto. So Community Boost exists to empower social ventures changing the world. We're a digital marketing agency that works directly with nonprofit organizations to help them raise more online. We do this through a bunch of different ways. We help nonprofits manage their $10,000 a month free Google ad grant. We help organizations run Facebook and Instagram advertising, Bing, YouTube advertising as well. We also work with organizations to enhance their search engine optimization. So if any of that works for you, you're interested in learning more, we would love to hear from you. But we also love to serve organizations by providing the content that they need to really succeed. So we do that in a couple of ways with webinars like this one. So thanks for joining and engaging with us today. And we also have our Nonprofit Marketing Summit, of which Canto was a sponsor last time. So thanks again to Canto for that. And we are able to serve, since it started, 40,000 nonprofits through the Nonprofit Marketing Summit. So thank you for being here. Thank you for engaging. We're excited to have you. I do want to offer, just before turning this over to Ariana, We have a free resource package and marketing strategy session for you. So if you're interested in learning more about how you can get free resources as well as that call with our team to like really sit down, work with you on creating a way for you to enhance your digital marketing, we would love to do that. So I put the link in the chat. I think that went to hosts and panelists. So I'm going to do that again for everyone. And you can also scan the QR code right here. So yeah, without too much further ado, I want to turn it over to Ariana Keil, who's the marketing manager over at Canto. So Ariana comes from a digital and traditional marketing background. She's been in the field for 7 years and over 4 years with digital marketing experience specifically. And you're going to learn just a wealth of information. Canto did a great presentation during the summit, and I'm really excited to learn more about how nonprofits can effectively be reusing and repurposing content, because I think that's such a challenge for all of us today. You need so much content, all these different channels. How do you really manage this and make it feasible? So Ariana, thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely glad to be here. All right, so I am going to share my screen, make sure this actually works.
And did you want to
All right.
we can start off with a question for everyone?
Yeah, let's open it with a question.
All right. So what do you feel like is your biggest challenge when it comes to content creation for your nonprofit? And we would just love to hear from you in the chat.
All right, so while you all think about that, sure we've got some really good answers we can address later in the Q&A. Definitely want to know what it was. Welcome to the Nonprofit Marketer's Guide to Reusing and Repurposing Content. Very glad to see you all today. As Candace mentioned, I'm a marketer at Canto. We're a leader in digital asset management software, and we're very privileged to have many local, national, and international nonprofit orgs as our customers. They form a very large part of our customer base, and because of that, we've learned that there are a lot of unique marketing challenges to them that are a little bit different than for-profit businesses. Earlier this year, we attended the Nonprofit Marketing Summit hosted by Community Boost, and we hosted a panel on scaling content creation. We saw such a wealth of engagement and questions that I wanted to dive deeper into some more tactical advice for strategy that can have a huge impact on content marketing, which is, of course, reusing and repurposing content. So today, we are going to cover what reusing and repurposing content actually entails and what processes you need to have in place in order to do that successfully. So as a nonprofit, there's a lot of challenges, specific challenges that you're going to face. The demand for content, it never stops. And this is more difficult for nonprofit orgs than at other companies for a few reasons. First off, staff. Are you an army of one, staff of a handful, supplemented by multiple volunteers, which each work a few hours a week? Small budgets, don't think I need to say more on that. It's something that is always an ongoing challenge. And multiple audiences. Most companies have one or two audiences that they need to reach to promote their product or their service. As a nonprofit, you have many. You have your donors, prospective and current volunteers, the media and press, the community you want to serve, researchers and fellow grant organizations, your own employees, and of course, multiple channels, your website, your social channels of engagement, print solicitations, event collateral that you need to produce, of course, a never-ending stream of emails and videos. It just goes on and on. So reusing and repurposing content is kind of the solution to this ongoing treadmill of content creation, where you just feel like it's a never-ending stream of creating. It's like laundry. The second you finish, there's more. So you got to start thinking about your content as versatile, as repurposable, as reusable. So there's a lot of benefits to this. First off, saving your time, conserving your financial resources, your personnel resources, planning out your editorial calendar further and with more confidence, and being able to actually stick to it and meet those deadlines. And of course, maximizing the impact of every story. The shelf life of any piece of content is very short. Really what you want to do is avoid that feeling of churn and burn by squeezing every story, every case study, and every photo in your library for the maximum impact. But learning how to do this is a little more complex. It's not just enough to know, yes, I need to reuse and repurpose my content. Obviously, that's going to be necessary and I want to do it. You have to make it a sustainable practice that continues to save you time and your resources in the long run. And that requires, again, more than just recognizing the benefits. First, you need to truly know your content. And once you know your content, you have to understand your audience, or in your case, most likely audiences. And once you have a real grasp of those two things, you map the content to the audience. And this is made easier when you begin to think about your content like building blocks. Finally, today, we'll go over some real life examples and suggestions so you can see how this strategy actually works in action. So let's get started. So knowing your content, the first thing you're going to want to do is a content audit. You probably already have great content, but where is it? You want to complete an inventory of every piece of content. This includes all your copy, impact stories, white papers, interviews, annual appeals, the copy from your social posts, the copy from your emails, all your video content, whether it's old archival footage, recent footage, you want to know where all of it is, what it entails. And of course, all your images. And at this point, you should also begin to look at where it's stored, who has access to it, and begin to implement the consistent library structure. So once you're doing your content audit, you're going to start looking at your library. And in order to implement organization and searchability, you're going to need to understand what metadata is. Simply put, metadata is just data that describes data. It allows for searchability. It often utilizes keywords and tags. It can indicate the file type, the length and size of things. Basically, if you ever have done a double right click and gone to details on a file, that in itself is a basic form of metadata. But I would encourage you to think of it more expansive. It's not just, this is a JPEG and it was created in 2017. There's so much more that metadata can include. So when you start thinking about your library organization, you're going to want to think about what structure works best for you. And there's a lot of ways to do it. And what's going to work best for your organization is really going to depend on your needs and your resources. You may be working with an existing internal file system, a cloud-based shared file system, or digital asset management platform. The most important thing, wherever your library exists, is to create and maintain consistency. That's consistency of naming structure, of description, of keywords and tags if you're able to include them. One of the biggest stumbling blocks in maintaining your library happens when there's inconsistency. The other is when there's knowledge only held by certain individuals that disappears when they leave or move on from their role. And that's when your digital assets become lost and you waste time recreating good content. So we know the importance of a library that's consistent, enriched with metadata, and designed to actually be functional and easily used by your team. And when I say your team, that can mean just your full-time employees. It can mean all of your volunteers, whether those volunteers be long-term or temporary. You have to think about all the different teams that are going to be using your library of content that will need access to it, and how much access do they need, and how much access are you comfortable giving them. Once you know the current state of your content and have decided on a framework and the conventions for your content library, you can start thinking about the workflow. So what does your content workflow look like now? As before you can effectively reuse and repurpose the content, you need to understand the current state of that workflow. Know who is responsible for certain tasks and how those tasks are done. And then make sure that that knowledge is documented and available. The most organized system isn't going to be effective unless you organize the workflows and the people that are interacting with it. So this in terms of thinking about it as who creates your content, who maintains the library, who decides on that editorial calendar and holds people to account, and who's responsible for each channel, who's responsible for the social, who's responsible for the email, who's responsible for maintaining the website. And then how is your content uploaded? How is your metadata organized? How is the content reviewed and approved? And how often can you realistically expect to create brand new content? That's something that's going to be different for each organization. It's something you're going to need to think about really realistically. Is it realistic for you to do a blog post a week, to do a Facebook, a LinkedIn, and an Instagram post every 3 or 4 days? Don't set goals that are a little ambitious, but achievable. It's not going to do you any good if you feel like you're constantly failing to achieve those goals. You're constantly running up against deadlines and stressed out. It's better to have goals that are achievable and achieve those consistently. So we know the content. Now we need to develop an understanding of the audience. So who do you want to reach with your content? You likely have a good sense of this already, but I'm talking about formalizing your intuitive understanding of the different groups, which makes it easier to reach them with content that's not just going to drive engagement, but is really going to speak to them. So in the for-profit marketing world, we have what's called an ideal customer profile. For nonprofits, the ICP, the C in it wouldn't stand for customer, maybe the information consumer. I'm honestly still working on what the backronym is for that. I promise eventually I'll come up with something good. But these are representations of the different groups you need to reach with your content. So to build an ICP, you need to start collecting data. You need to identify groups. And again, these groups in your case could be donors, the impacted community, your volunteers, any other group that your content needs to reach. You need to identify key attributes. Once you know the groups, look into the data and see if you can identify common attributes. What languages do they speak? What hobbies unite them? Are there shared values or affiliations that they have in common? Then you identify the channels of influence. Where do they get their content? Where do they like to get their content? Maybe you look at your donors and they're usually say between 35 and 60, prefer Facebook, hate Instagram, like getting physical mail, and maybe they all read a couple of similar trade publications. Maybe your volunteers tend to follow influencers who post on parenting and organic foods. Maybe they never open their email if it's not from someone they know, but they'll check their Instagram every hour. You have to be able to know where they are so that you can reach them. And once you've done all these things, you create your personas. Now, a persona isn't a real person. It's an amalgamation of likely preferences and concerns and other data that generally applies to a group. But doing this helps you target not just the type of content, but the way it's delivered, so that it's most likely to be impactful and actually drive the engagement you want, whether that's making a contribution, signing up to volunteer, attend a specific event that you're running. So now we've got our content, we've got our ICPs. But what do they want? What are key issues that they want to hear about? How do they want to be reached? How often? Through what channels? And what languages? What's going to motivate them and emotionally resonate with them? And finally, what questions do they need answered before they take the desired action that you want them to take? Once you understand each group, what they want, and how to meet their content needs, what do you want them to do? What's the goal? What emotions do you want them to feel when they engage with your content? Inspired, concerned, angry, grateful. The reason it's important to think about emotions, not just actions, is it helps you avoid tonal whiplash and inappropriate or misguided calls to action. And that's because the most inspired piece of content, if it doesn't facilitate the emotional response you're trying to curate in order to motivate the action, it's likely not only to fail, but it can cause more harm than good. So what actions do you want to motivate the take? And how do you want them to feel when they do it? So we've got the content, we've got the ICPs, and you know both inside and out. So now start thinking about your content a little differently. You want to look at it like building blocks, or shall not be named brand name construction toys of interlocking plastic blocks. You know what I mean? You can put them together, multiple configurations. You can form content assets of any size for any purpose. Or you can take apart larger existing assets to form bite-sized pieces of content that are suitable for other channels. And you can stagger them over time. They can reoccur later, be attached to different pieces. This is all how you need to think about reusing and repurposing. So the building blocks of content that can be identified for repurposing, I like to think of it as a checklist. You want to identify all the formats a piece of content can be repurposed for, the forms it can take, short content, an ebook, a webinar, a blog post, the channels it can be used for. And by channels, I don't just mean social in general. You need to think about, is this good for Facebook? Could I use it for Instagram? Is it more of a LinkedIn thing? So we're going to go into detail about more of that in a minute. But one thing I want to make note of is what's good to go. Quickly identify your content that can be redeployed pretty much as is, and make a distinction between that and what's going to require a little more effort before it's ready to be used. What only needs a little bit of copy edit or some imagery formatting before it can be used again in a different form. And then other content that maybe has good bones, but needs a few hours of editing or needs another team member to work on it before it's ready to be redeployed. It's definitely important to kind of make those distinctions. But how do you house that information? So the best way to house that information is, of course, again, through the metadata. There are workarounds. Some people keep spreadsheets with all of their content, and they're using rows and columns and VLOOKUP systems in Excel to figure out what's ready to go, what needs further work to repurpose, where it could be repurposed. The cleanest, most sustainable way is going to be through the metadata, though. So as you're doing your content audit, this can start to look like a huge task. Even looking at your content as multifunctional building blocks, it can feel difficult to know where to even start. What I would recommend to start with is what we call evergreen content. So evergreen content is content that doesn't age. It doesn't become irrelevant. It's content that draws on your value or mission statement as an organization. And copy like this can be updated with new stats or news items or quotes. Visual assets like this can be modified or placed within another piece of content. Evergreen content is where you want to start your repurposing and reusing journey. And we're going to go into some examples right now. So how you actually do it is the part you've been waiting for. One of the things you can look at that pretty much everybody has, regardless of the size of your organization, is going to be an annual appeal, and related to that, your annual reports. So how can you break it down? Think about deep dives into specific data points. They could be individual blog posts or each case study that you reference. That can be a social post with a meaningful image or carousel of images. You can update your homepage or your impact page with infographics that showcase key statistics from the report. Another great thing you can do is, if your founder or another leader at your organization can record a short video introducing it, that can have way bigger impact than a standard preamble letter from the director. And it's also much more shareable and reusable in social platforms than, a written intro would be. Related to that is, of course, the research findings. And whether it's research from your annual report, your own research from other times in the year, third-party research, you can dust off the most impactful statistics into infographics to share. And whether you're sharing that on social media, blogs, emails, don't underestimate how powerful it can be to combine statistics with emotionally resonant photos or existing case studies. Both are made more powerful by being seen together. New research is a great opportunity to reuse older content. Pair your existing qualitative research with the new quantitative data. And finally, don't underestimate infographics. Anything numerical is more easily understood with a graphical component. You need to show your audience what these numbers actually look like in the real world. And if you can link that with an infographic, with an impactful photo, with an existing case study from your library, it's all the more impactful. So we all know video performs better. It retains attention. It's more shareable than other forms of content, but many teams also struggle to create enough of it. Not many people have a videographer on staff. Maybe you have one engaged for specific events or special things. Maybe you're relying on people just using, their phone cameras to record day-to-day operations. Many teams struggle to create enough of it, or they struggle with how to utilize the video content that they have. So one thing you can do when you're looking at your video content is cutting existing content down. So one way to think of things is providing micro-learning opportunities. I've seen a lot of interesting uses of this in resource libraries from different nonprofits, or even just utilized within blog posts. So if you have a media interview or an impactful speech that was recorded, summarize key points in a short blog post, include a 1 to 5 minute clip from the longer video, along with some takeaways, talking points, include a couple links to additional resources or relevant articles for further education. So now you're building a resource library with bite-sized multimedia content. And of course, a great place to utilize video is, again, social. Never underestimate the ability of a video to boost social engagement. Create YouTube playlists, which contain clips from longer videos, and you can group them by key topics or by a specific speaker if that person's well known. And as always, make sure you're using the tags and keywords in the description. Another thing to do on social is highlight reels for Instagram, and through links, direct the viewer back to the website for the full version. Another thing you can do that will also kind of extend the life of it and build more content over a longer period of time is to cut clips into a story, crop it into portrait format and upload to Instagram, 15 seconds a piece. Spread that out over a few hours or a few days, with each piece linking back to the main story on your website. If you have a podcast, always record it. You would be surprised how many people listen to podcasts on YouTube, in addition to, more obvious social platforms like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Again, you can cut clips from that into highlight reels on different social platforms. Emails is a bit of an easy one. I think it's kind of a layup. Most people are going to maybe check your blog, or maybe they'll check their inbox for emails from you, but they're not going to do both regularly. You can easily combine a month's worth of blog posts into a monthly e-newsletter. You can include other types of content too, links to videos. Quick recommendation, don't directly embed videos. It can make things much more likely to get caught in a spam filter. Links to case studies, updates on your current campaigns. One thing to remember when you're curating a monthly e-newsletter is to keep the summaries within the body of the email short. They can click through to read the full article or to watch the full video if they want. More and more people, they're checking their email primarily on their mobile device. So we need to keep things short, and we need to keep our formatting clear. Another thing, this is a tough one, blog posts. So this, I think, is the one that feels so much like a never-ending content treadmill. It's just a Sisyphean effort every week, every month to maintain a blog. You need to keep it updated frequently so that you can maintain your good SEO rankings, but you only have so many case studies, so many events, research findings, videos to summarize or preview. If you're trying to maintain a pace of creating, say, a blog post a week, you're going to feel like you're scraping the bottom of the barrel pretty quick. But one thing you can do is repurpose those pieces of content by adding volunteer or employee perspectives. Introduce a case study with a quote from a team member about a similar case that they helped with. If you had a successful event, Have a team member sum up their top 5 experiences from the event and include a selfie. You do that for a handful of team members and you've made one event into a week or a month's worth of posts. You can liven up just about any piece of content with an insider perspective. So social media, again, I know we keep mentioning social media, but that's honestly because you can kind of take a social media eye or put a social media focus on any existing piece of content. Again, here's where you want to think about breaking up the blocks. A case study, well, they can become a series of posts, a pictorial carousel, or even a GIF. Again, social is a great place for repurposing video content in the form of shorter, more easily digestible videos, and then combining that with existing copy. We've mentioned social media as a channel where you can use existing content several times now, but it goes both ways. You can also break up blocks of existing content for social and combine the blocks of existing social into longer form content. So this is going to depend on your team structure and what you've focused on in terms of content creation in the past. Maybe you had an amazing social media manager who was posting constantly. Maybe you've just hired one and historically haven't had anything on social. You might have more short form content than long form or vice versa. Pull from where you're strong with content to support channels that are comparatively less developed. So this is a little difficult one. It's called trend jacking or news jacking. It was an idea that originated in PR, but I think it's really useful for marketing teams in general. You can piggyback your content onto topics and events that are circulating in the public forum of social media. It may feel like your content is stale or that it doesn't have legs, but you can reintroduce older content if it relates to any of the below. New research findings and news. Now, this could be monthly job reports, inflation reports, or other economic data that gets released regularly. Annual updates on, say, the UN Millennium Goals or the Paris Climate Agreement. If it's a big enough research item to get reported in regular papers or evening news shows, and it relates to your mission, find a piece of content that's related and post it. News and research constantly moves forward. And if you keep not even a close eye, just a general eye to it over time, you'll likely find a news story that's perfect for you to latch onto. Of course, related to that is viral stories, holidays, trends. Most social media apps have a way you can see what's trending. The only thing I would caution on this is you don't want to get something that's a flash in the pan. You want something that trends over a reasonable period of time. It usually tends to be a topic that's a little bit broader. So the metaverse was one that trended for 3 or 4 months, and a lot of different brands were thinking about it. You know, crypto, whether it's a negative take on it or a positive take on it, that trended for a while. You know, there are certain things that will have a shelf life of more than a couple of weeks. There's no point in trying to latch on to a trend if by the time you actually, you know, repurpose the piece of content for it, it's gone. Again, when you're doing this, it's really important not to forget your hashtags. If you're trying to capitalize on a trending piece of news or a viral video or a holiday, and you haven't included the appropriate hashtags, people aren't going to be able to find it. But, and here's the big but, there's a caveat to trend jacking as a tool. And that's what I call reading the room. Always read the room first. If the trend is lighthearted and whimsical, it's not going to pair well with a case study or a photo that drives an emotional response of sadness or concern. Again, this is where we go back to keeping in mind the emotional response you want your audience to have after reading your content. If that desired emotional response doesn't match well with the news or trend, either pick a different piece of content to utilize or just sit this one out. This is an area that I think people ignore or just kind of, it tends to slip their mind and they don't think about it the same way as they do their blog or their emails or their social content. But any piece of copy, any visual asset that you've created for a physical piece of content can be repurposed digitally and vice versa. If you've taken the time to create an InDesign file for a brochure for your annual mailer, why not create a different formatted version for your website? So also, don't forget to apply the send metadata to these files for your printable assets as you do for the ones that exist digitally. Because without that metadata, a great poster for an event that you spent a really long time designing that could be repurposed into a social graphic or used as an intro slide in a presentation, it's not going to be found in your library and you'll end up wasting precious time recreating. So again, the digital and physical worlds, they're interchangeable. And so is the content that exists within them. But without the metadata, it's going to be hard to find. It's going to be difficult to repurpose. And you'll spend way longer than you should, typing into that search bar or sorting through, a file that contains hundreds of items trying to find it. So really, thank you so much for joining me for this. We're going to open things up to Q&A in just a minute. I kind of wanted to summarize what we've gone over in terms of repurposing and reusing content. First off, know the content, know the audience, and then develop processes that record and sustain that knowledge. Most importantly, make sure that knowledge is easily understood and referenced by others. It does no good if it's proprietary, if only one person out of your team of 5 actually understands it. It has to be a system that's easily usable, easily referenced, and kind of has a universality to it. Now, once you've created your ICPs and you can map your content to them, you can begin to see the content as building blocks. And those building blocks can be put together and pulled apart to form any number of pieces of content for all your different channels and all your different audiences. It's a process. It requires upfront work. I definitely would not deny that. It requires a conscious effort to maintain, but it creates an environment where you can plan your content effectively and reach your audience and connect with them more efficiently. Most importantly, avoid the wasted time of recreating content. And you're also going to be able to maximize the impact of every story, every photo, and every statistic. So with that, let's get the Q&A started.
All right. Thank you so much, Ariana. I think this is just such a practical way that we can really think about our content differently. I feel like instead of just always spinning the wheel, always trying to create something new, this is just incredible and very helpful. I mean, I think a lot of what I was seeing in the chat before was that, this is a challenge for organizations. It is hard to keep creating new content, especially, and having things also like still feel fresh at the same time. So I think this is a perfect one to do. So we have a few questions coming in. I would love it if anyone who wants to ask more questions, you can put them in the Q&A pane and we'll queue them up. So Marissa asked, we often identify which pieces of content are good to go, but then when we go back to them to reuse them in 6 months or 12 months, it needs some updating. What's the best way to make these decisions so they don't immediately become out of date? Or what are your suggestions for Marissa?
Well, I would say, so best way to house that is, yes, again, I feel like I'm beating a dead horse here, is in the metadata. But essentially, if you have identified something that's going to be good to repurpose, the moment you do that, put a time window on it. If this piece, this asset, this is good for at least 3 months. If I reuse it within these 3 months, I don't have to touch a thing on it. Indicate that, whether that means attaching it to the metadata. If you don't have a system that supports that, it could mean recording that in a spreadsheet. You might have a column with information of use before Q3. You have like 10 assets in that category. Use before end of 2022. Maybe you have 20 assets in that category. That way, that date doesn't pass before you use that asset. It's going to remind you that there's a ticking clock on it, so you'll actually reuse it. And then you'll also know, maybe you go back to the library, you add a note on it, said use before Q3, it's Q4 now. You can still use it, but then you mentally already know, okay, it is going to require a little bit of updating now. That's what I would recommend.
Awesome. Thanks, Ariana. I've seen a couple of questions in the chat around metadata, like how do you actually create it? So any examples that you have to share would be great, but also any suggestions on how to create that.
Gotcha. So this is where something like a dedicated digital asset management platform or software, Canto is one, there are others, is useful, is the ease in which you can input metadata, that you can attach to a file, keywords, tags, the description, facial recognition, if there's certain, founders or donors that appear within it, dates, suitability for the audience. It could be smart tags that utilize AI that are capturing things like there's people in this photo, there's food in this photo, this is outdoors. Can also include in metadata the rights, is there DRM related to this? Are there children in it that we need to get waivers for before we, use the photos in a different context? Outside of utilizing a dedicated digital asset management software to create that metadata, there are workarounds. As I said, in previous lives, I'd use spreadsheets where, I would have like the file name, the link to the file, and then a number of columns, each one populated with specific data about it. I know some people use productivity boards, like Monday or, any suite, any part of the Asana suite, Trello, where they're using their content, each content is a card on that board or an item on that board, and then they're filling out descriptions within there, or linking it to other pieces of content within those boards. So there are some workarounds, of course, also just the very simple way of putting in a description, like I talked about, the very basic, if you use Windows and you right click file details, there are other ways you can attach more information to that. Some people have very, very detailed and systematized naming conventions. Maybe it says like date, time, person in it, place it occurred, used for social, rights restricted. So, oh, this is one I can't just use anywhere. I got to double check. So some people do put things in the title names. So there's a lot of different ways you can record metadata. Some are easier than others, but there's a lot of different ways you can do it.
Yeah, what might be great too is if you can send over like maybe like a support article or something kind of like
100%, yeah.
showcasing metadata, and we can include that in the follow-up email tomorrow.
We will actually include that. There is, we have a couple really good blog posts on our website about explaining what metadata is and also, how to apply it and how to make it searchable, best practices. I will 100% include that.
Perfect. Yes, thank you so much. That'll be so helpful. Yeah, it's a way of categorizing your assets so that you can easily find them when you need them. I know that's a challenge for myself. So this is super practical, super helpful. So thanks. Lots of great questions still coming in. So I like this one. You talked a little bit about personas earlier. So how does one go about creating personas for their audience? And yeah, just love to hear any suggestions you have for Anne.
So in the for-profit world, we often give these things like cute names, like bank manager Betty, if we have a product that targets the finance industry. We kind of try to create an image, and that would include certain key characteristics, certain preferences, what kind of news they like to get, what kind of content they like to read, where they like to read it, if there's any differences in specific like language needs or processing needs. Does this group need certain adaptive aids when they receive their content? All that information we would want to put in there. We would also want to put, when this person engages with our content in general, what efforts do we want them to take? If it's donors, we're looking at, we want to motivate them to give. If it's volunteers, we want to motivate them to volunteer. If it's existing employees, we want to motivate them to be happy in their career, feel appreciated, and stay with us. So when you're creating a persona, I like to break it down into who they are, all the different data points around them, what they need, and what we want from them. I think if you can answer those questions in those 3 areas, I think you can get a pretty robust idea of the persona, and it'll make it easier
Yeah.
for you to match content to them.
Awesome. Thanks. I also wanted to point everyone to, we have our nonprofit marketing plan template, which offers some examples of what a persona looks like and will help you kind of craft it. So it's actually like a worksheet. You can write your write your personas right in there. So just something, a resource for you if you want to take a look. What I love to do, especially when it comes to, because I think there's like a couple of different audiences, right? There are always going to be different personas that you, like you mentioned. But I think, like, especially when it comes to thinking about donors, what I think is really helpful is to just kind of like think about like one of your favorite donors. like who is this person that they keep giving to your organization? They're really excited about your organization. You probably know them because their name comes up all the time. And think about, some of their characteristics. And I think that does help at least start it. Obviously, it's pretty specific, but it can help you at least get started when you have a real person in mind, and then sort of extrapolate from there.
That is so true, Candace. Like, as I said, it is an amalgamation, but if you start with a person you actually know as like the seed of that, it can make it a lot easier. Yeah, I have 100% done that. You use somebody who is a great kind of key reference example, and then you build around them.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to do it. And so I saw some people were looking for the template. I put the link in the chat so everyone can go right there and download it. So awesome, thanks. So a lot of great questions here. Yeah, so I think this kind of leads into it. So Donna asked, I'll kind of summarize it. So Donna asked, like, when you are creating all this content, right? How do you make the most out of content if you are doing this like segmentation approach and like speaking to different audiences? So like, you want to make the most of your content. Do you make it more general when you're creating content, or how do you suggest they do it when they are segmenting?
Say, if you're creating a brand new piece of content, so you're not reusing or repurposing at this point, you're just creating something fresh. Create it for the audience that you want to use it for at that moment. Have an eye to the future, do keep in mind like ways you can make this reusable and repurposable, but don't let that limit you. Don't let that make your content then so bland that it's really not speaking to any of your segments. One thing I would recommend doing, and this is something that I do myself, is save different versions of things, properly label them, but have, like, for example, if you have a graphic template for an event that you're doing, and you're going to want to put out social posts about this event that target your donors, that target your volunteers, that target community members that you want to attend. You might save it at a point where it is kind of basic, if it's like an InDesign file or, a Canva or a Figma file. Save it at a point where you haven't fleshed out all the copy, where you haven't put a specific call to action at the bottom yet with a link. So then you might have, say, October Volunteer Day basic template, and then you have hyphen volunteer version, donor version, attendee version. That's one way you can handle that. Saving things before they get to the point where they're super specific. But definitely don't let the eye for reusing and repurposing content limit you from creating content that is very targeted. One thing I'd also say for that is, if you find you've got a lot of really great impactful images that are kind of versatile, serve multiple segments, multiple personas, know that, include either, in the description or the metadata, suitable for all personas. And then you know that this is kind of baked in, good to go for everybody. And then you just make the little snippet of copy at the bottom a little different for each group.
Awesome. That's super helpful. Donna said the same in the chat, but I think that's also a great way for everyone to think about how they're creating content. I also love, yeah, like when you are saving something at that place where it can kind of be adjusted for different, different audiences. Canva has that resize option, and it makes it super easy. So if you are doing something like for Instagram, but then you're like, I know I'm gonna post this on in an email or in different channels, like you can always like use that resize tool, so that you're making it like once and then you can resize. And of course there's going to be adjustments, but
That's definitely to resize and reformatting. Canva's got that. In Canto libraries, we also have that, like an instant download, so if there's a really great picture, you'll just go to download, it'll be like size for Instagram, size for Facebook, size for a banner. So yeah, if there are assets that are going to be reused across multiple things, that is definitely a good thing to keep in mind.
yeah. I want to see what your thoughts are on this. I might be able to help too. I think it's definitely within the realm of like content that we're creating. So for updating blog posts with dates and the titles, best XYZ of 2020, is it better to publish a refresh of the blog post or just update the original post?
I say that kind of depends. Like from an SEO perspective, you don't want to have repetitive content. You do get penalized for that if you have multiple blog posts that basically contain the exact same thing, with no differences, or the only difference is so minor that it's literally just the header changed. When you think about reusing and repurposing content, you do want to frame it differently enough, that you're not getting that, or, just when you're reusing it, you're not reusing it as multiple blog posts, but it's one blog post, and then you reuse it in social, you reuse it in email and other channels. Personally, I know from a user experience perspective, I really dislike when I go to a blog and I read an article and then under the bottom, this is specifically if it's like news related or like best, like you said, listicles, best X of 2020, top, trends for this year. And at the bottom, it says, this article is originally posted in 2015. I think that can be detrimental if you're framing the piece as breaking news itself. And I think you can avoid that sort of negative user feeling by, again, making sure that the quantitative data is new. The qualitative data can be old. You're fleshing the story out with existing older data. That's, stories, quotes, personal interviews, that's fine. But the specific data points should be recent and fresh.
Yeah. And like, even just to that point, like I always recommend like updating and refreshing that post itself, because you've already built up like the traffic, you've already probably built up some kind of ranking, and you can improve on that. And so I would definitely opt for updating a blog post, if it's pretty much like a change of year and some of the content on the page, just so that you get the benefits of the traffic and the ranking that you've already established. So if the content, like you said, is like the same, I would refresh it. And then something else to think about, like when you are like reusing and repurposing like blog post content, I always really like to see, or blog post content or like downloadable guides or whatever. Sometimes what you can do is kind of create like a package of all like the relevant, oh, we have 5 blog posts on this topic. create like a package, and then now you have a new piece of content that's directing to all of your old pieces of content that you've already created and are relevant. So I love to do
Mm,
packages, because if people are interested in a certain topic, they're probably going to look for those.
100%. I love getting to the bottom of a blog post and seeing the read more section.
Mhm,
And that's
mhm.
another great way to refresh or reintroduce older content. And it is relevant because it's like, if I've actually read to the bottom of like a 2.5 page blog post, I'm not just perusing, I'm actually interested and I do want to know more. And whether you include that as related links, as download a package where it's like almost like an ebook or a collection of assets. Yeah, I think that is a really good user experience to give someone.
Yeah. Cool. And then Genevieve asks, how can we collect data on our different groups? I think this ties into like the
Mm.
persona question, but how do you know who you're talking to basically, and how can you craft
Right.
messaging?
So that depends. Obviously, data privacy is a huge concern. So we do not want to be hoovering in massive amounts of data without people's consent about them. Um, but one thing you can do that is a great first party way of gathering that kind of data is just by talking to them. You have phone calls with your donors, you know what they read, if they attend, a certain faith-based organization, you know how old their kids are and if they're in school and where they go and things like that. You know, you talk to a few different donors and you learn about them. Same thing with your volunteers. You know what motivates them. You talk to them every day. So it's really just about getting that information. There are certain things, that I think most data gets collected and we're all pretty comfortable with, like, do you use Chrome? Do you use Safari? Are you usually on mobile or are you usually on your desktop? What language do you want to get stuff in? Certain data like that is pretty easily collected, but the more nuanced data, it's in the for-profit world, it's often, like in the form of case studies. You talk to your existing clients. Why are you our
Mhm.
client? How
Right.
do you use us? How did you find us? What made you choose us? And in the nonprofit world, I don't think it's too different.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like those questions, like, why are you our client? Why do you use us? Well, like, all of those same questions. You can also do a donor survey,
Mhm.
which is super helpful as well. Even if a segment of your audience actually answer, it really does give you like pretty good insights. And it's a way to open a conversation too. Like, I think that's we got to build relationships, and we have to know who they are. And yeah, donor surveys are awesome. We only have like a couple more minutes.
Oh my gosh,
So
that time just flew by.
I know it really did. Great questions, amazing questions. I so Denise asked,
Mhm.
are there any tools that you recommend for creating a content editorial calendar? They currently use Hootsuite for entering posts across all social media platforms,
Mhm.
but it's not great for seeing the overall big picture.
Mm. Yeah, I have used Hootsuite and Sprout Social, and yeah, they're great tools, but they are, channel specific. It's just social. Um, I have used a couple different productivity, management tools. I've used Trello, I've used Monday, and those are both, I think, very effective because you can include multiple types, and there are calendar views. Um, I know some people just use their plain old like Google Calendar or Outlook calendar for it. I think that can work if you have a very small team or if it's really just you. I think that's fine. But if you have a larger team or, some employees, some volunteers, some contractors, and it's kind of a mix of everybody looking at it, I would recommend, using a productivity software where you can get the detailed kind of row by row view of, blog post here, social here, event today, email newsletter, printed mailer. But then you can go to a calendar view while you'll actually see what's on specific days. And what's also great about a lot of those kind of productivity softwares is you can put like start dates and end dates. So you can put it's due the 14th, but you better start working on it the 7th.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Yeah, Monday.com is amazing. We also have we use Content Cal too.
Yeah, that's a good
Yeah,
one too. Yeah.
yeah. So I think it's like pretty similar from what you were describing. So yeah.
It's really all honestly like that really depends. Like, what does your team find easiest to use? Because in terms
Mhm.
of the actual, you know, tools and features, they're pretty similar. So it's like,
Yeah,
what do you find easiest to use? And more importantly, what is everybody willing to actually adopt? No point in getting a software if then nobody uses it.
right. Exactly. And for your digital asset management, you should definitely check out Canto.
Okay, yeah. So little toot my own horn here. We work with so many nonprofits, from, small 2-3 person operations to, big multinationals, that have people all over the globe in multiple languages. We do nonprofit discounts as well. So we really are motivated to make, a plan, for Canto that's going to work with your team and your budget. Go to www.canto.com and we would be more than happy to speak with you and see if you're ready to, go on a digital asset management journey.
Thank you so much, Ariana. This has been incredible. I think this is such a big thing that hasn't been talked about, especially in the nonprofit space, is reusing and repurposing content. So they such great tips. I recommend that everyone checks out Canto. I'm pasting a link in the chat, and I'll go ahead and send that follow-up email with your recording, with the slides, and those resources that we mentioned tomorrow. And yeah, if you didn't get your question answered, we would still love to hear from you. So you can either reach out to myself, or if you want to paste your email, if anyone didn't get the chance to connect with you directly, or I can also forward anything your way as well. So
Awesome. Thanks so much, Candace. Yeah, I would love to be able to answer any of your questions if you've got follow-ups. Love talking to nonprofits. And yeah, it's great to be part of that community. And thank you so much for inviting me.
yeah, thanks for being here. It was wonderful to have you. So thanks to all of you who have been engaging. Such great questions, a lot of engagement in the chat. And it's wonderful spending this time with all of you. All right. Well, thanks again for attending, and have a great rest of your day.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.